Hi everybody, today I wanted to show you how to make a simple mold out of plaster Paris. So the first thing that you're going to need is your models of whatever it is that you're wanting to cast. And then you'll start off by measuring a cup to the height that you want, but make sure that you leave a little bit more so that you have something on the bottom of your mold. It doesn't have to be perfect when you're cutting it because you can always level your model afterwards. So you'll get that cut for both pieces, and in the video you'll see how I kind of measure it out using the model so that it will fit all the way down in without touching the bottom. The next step that you'll want to do is make sure that your parts are nice and clean and smooth so that you will get the best results possible. You can see on this one I'm measuring about a ½ inch above what I need. And it's okay if you don't make it perfect because you can always go back in and fix it with the scissors later. The way that this plaster Paris works is it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So I already have 2 cups of water measured out, and you'll see me scooping in 4 cups of plaster Paris to give you a 2-to-1 ratio. And this is me just cleaning it up because these scissors kind of squish the cup more than they cut. Also, you'll want to get your glue gun warming up so that it's ready to go when you get your model in the mold. It's a good idea to double check and make sure that you have enough space everywhere. And this is where I bring in the plaster and show it sets in about 20 to 30 minutes, which is pretty cool. Get a workable mold by that point. It does heat up a little bit as it's drying, but not substantial. This is really fine dust, so you want to make sure that you are careful without making it go all in the air and breathing it in, because it's not good for you. And make sure to wear a mask when you're doing it. As long as you use a similar size cup for the plaster and the water, it's a 2-to-1 mixture, so you don't necessarily need a measuring cup. As long as you know exactly how much water you put in, you'll be able to know how much plaster to put in. I used a spoon to scoop out the plaster just to help with the dust, to make sure I wasn't kicking up a whole bunch of dust by pouring it. And that's the pre-measured 2 cups of water. This process does take a little bit of time, so just be patient and make sure that you're measuring out just enough. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect and leveled off, but you'll see that I kind of overfill my cup to compensate for not being flattened off on the top. After you get done measuring everything, you do want to make sure that you clean up your hands and the area really good. You don't want your pets or your kids to get into it. And obviously make sure that you wipe down the table. It does get a little bit messy and can cause some frustration trying to clean it up. So try and vacuum up as much dust as you can before wiping it down with a wet rag so you don't spread it all over the table. But this is the exact same cup that I used to measure the water. And so I know that 1 full cup was full of water, so 2 to 1, and it works out pretty good. I did try scooping it out just so it wasn't plopping into the water. That seemed to work okay, so just kind of play with it and see what works best for you. This video does show you a lot of the process of how to mix everything and make sure that you don't have bubbles, but there are some other really good videos that go in more depth of your model, and if you want to do something that's a little bit more complex, you definitely can with Plaster or Paris. These are just some basic models, just proof of concept to see if we can do it. At the end, I'll have some still shots of what they turned out like and how it all kind of works. The reason why you want to use the paper cups is so that you can peel the cup away from your mold. So at the end, you're able to actually peel it off, and Plaster Paris doesn't stick to plastic or anything that is really, really smooth. So on my models, I actually have a clear coat over a primer coat that was sanded down smooth. So it's really, really smooth, and the plaster ended up not sticking to it. So it worked out really good. Even this mixing container, I just left the plaster in it, and once it dried, in about 30 minutes, it all was able to just pop out. This is an important step. The reason why you put the water in before the plaster is it makes it so the plaster doesn't stick to the bottom. It makes it easier to get a consistent, get it stirred consistently throughout. And so that's one little trick that I kind of figured out, and you want to get this as smooth as possible. Just big clumps and stuff doesn't pick up all the little details, especially if you're doing an intricate model. So that's something to keep in mind with how you're setting yours up. It's okay if there's some tiny little clumps in there, but you just want to do the best job that you can. These models are super basic, and so it worked out pretty good. You do want to stir it until it's about, I would say, melted ice cream consistency, just so that it still will pour, but that you're not dripping it everywhere. So the way that I started this off was poured in the plaster. Make sure to leave enough room so that your mold won't overflow the cup that you put it in. You can tap it down a little bit to get out some bubbles, because bubbles will get into your casting if you don't. And you can always tap it after your model's in there as well. The cool idea that I had with these is to use popsicle sticks to attach my model to, so it'll hold it down and keep it from floating up. Now, I didn't do the best job hot gluing it, so sorry about that. I was working with a different type of glue, and it ended up being really liquidy, so that's why there's a silver glitter glue in there. You just move it around until you're about in the center and glue it down in place so that your mold won't lift up out of the plaster while it's curing. Another cool trick that I kind of learned while doing this is if you put your model too far down into the mold, it'll actually have some chip out, and that's something you'll see at the end where the top of the model opening will get broken away. So you just want to make sure that you leave a little bit of your model poking out so that you have a cleaner edge than I did. Make sure none of those hot glue strings get on your model, because that'll show up in the final casting. You'll push it down just until the top's right above the plaster and glue it in place. This part can be a little bit frustrating because it's wiggling around while you're trying to hot glue it, but just hang in there until it cools down, and you can tweak it just a little bit where you need to make sure that your model's as flat as possible. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but as a proof of concept and being able to figure out what materials you need to use, this ended up being a perfect match. The clear coat worked awesome for releasing, so you don't need any mold release, which is something that I was kind of concerned about at the beginning. You'll see me here using the popsicle stick to kind of break up some bubbles and bring them to the surface here. The next model is a little bit more difficult because it is a bigger one, and I kind of wanted to see how big we could go with it. And so as long as you have a smaller taper at the bottom leading up to a bigger taper at the top, your mold should come out pretty good. Obviously, if you have a bigger taper at the bottom and a smaller taper on top, it'll be pretty much impossible to get it out. So just keep that in mind when you're putting your model in. The orientation does matter. You'll see in this one there actually was quite a few clumps, so I probably could have stirred it a little bit better, but hopefully you guys will do a little bit better job when you're working on yours. This is something that I kind of messed up on. You can see the plaster's up a little bit high. I should have put in just a tiny bit less plaster, but you'll see me remove that here in a little bit. The longer one was easier to place just because it kind of held itself into the plaster. I didn't really have to move it around a whole lot, but that little one wanted to sink. So hot glue will be your best friend because you don't want it shifting or moving around, getting a model that's crooked. The whole reason that you would want to make a plaster mold would be if you're working with clay or working with anything that you can make something and put it into plaster to duplicate it over and over and over. Plaster of Paris is really good in high temperature. A lot of people will use it for molding metals and stuff like that, which works out pretty good. So thanks for watching.